I'm Jordan, and my topic of research was the Bauhaus, and I emphasized more on the architecture of the Bauhaus. It was founded in 1919 by architect from Germany, Walter Gropius. His first location was in Vermeer, Germany. The objective was pretty radical and was to change the material world and reflect art and design as a whole. The curriculum taught there was much like ours here, preliminary courses by incoming students, and then teaching them color theory, material, relationship with design, and then were then placed into specialized classes. In 1923, the Reformation of teaching goals, and they emphasized mass production as the motto of art and industry. In 1925, the school moved from Vermeer to the south, and Walter Gropius built the famous Bauhaus down here. It has a pinwheel designed for more space. In 1928, Hans Meyer took over for Walter Gropius. Then 2 years later, in the corner, his Ludwig Meyer's Mandara, and he took over for Meyer and emphasized architecture. In the same year, he moved the school to Berlin, which later was closed by the rising Nazi Party. All the teachers and instructors at the Bauhaus then moved and immigrated to the United States and emphasized architecture in Chicago and New York. Down there is the Whitney Museum, Art Museum by Marcel Breuer, and the other one is the Sears Tower. Pre-Bauhaus architecture wanted Greek Revival architecture, and this is from 1825 to 1860, and often painted white to resemble marble, which usually was used as stucco wood or stone, so not actually marble. Columns the most noted part. This is Colonial Revival architecture, and this was taken in Norfolk, Virginia, at my aunt's house. It's most popular from 1900 to 1950, and it is popular in the New England area. The facade was symmetrical and shutters on the side, along with window shades. This is the Bauhaus in Chicago, that opened in 1937. It's now known as the Illinois Institute of Technology. This began modernism in architecture, and is driven by the Industrial Revolution and the introduction of new synthetic materials such as glass, steel, and concrete materials. The goal of materials was to be honest about the way they're using them from the structure of the building. Steel was used for structural support and could easily assemble quickly, much like a puzzle. And concrete was used just for footing and main structural parts. Glass was another big material used in the Bauhaus movement, and either glass curtains or glass walls. This is a glass wall here. It sits on the footing of the building. And it's sometimes hung from the top face also, and holds no load-bearing walls, and it's very energy efficient due to the greenhouse effect. This led to the form of structuralism, which is based on the idea of things using materials that are opposing each other, so like glass and metal using like one wall, like here, and then also intersecting planes and cube grids in densely clustered areas for efficiency of space and connected courtyards. This is the towers before the other two were taken down, and this is part of functionalism, which is a product of structuralism. This is using all the area within the building for its most proper use and efficiency. Louis Sullivan was a famous U.S. architecture who made the quote, "Form follows function," famous. This is formalism, and this emphasizes the relationship of the materials with what's happening within the building. So for example, there's black engineering, and it's very rigid and straight, and mechanical engineering is held there. So it just gives a concept of what's being taught in the building, and it's the Bank of China. In the housing of Bauhaus architecture, this is a master's house. It's the original Bauhaus building that he built for all the instructors to live in. They stuck to minimalism approach, so it was simple and most just only sticking to essential items. And there's aesthetics with the Bauhaus architecture and housing. This is in Seattle. I saw this house a block from where I had stayed over spring break, and the picture I had taken had a big raindrop on it, so I had to get this from Google. Aesthetics of housing and architecture for the Bauhaus was They're square rectangular, smooth walls and surfaces with flat roofs and no cornice line. And a cornice line is like a crown molding on a cabinetry work. It's just like the top of it it just gives like a gaudy kind of detailed display. And there's no unneeded decorations or ornaments. And the colors are usually in a black and white scale or beige. And furnitures and fixtures within are usually pretty simple and functional. Thank you.
That's an interesting house.
Yeah, there's a lot of modern houses there. I don't know if it's just because it's warm all the time, so they really like to relate the house in with the landscaping.
I really like the transition from history to the architecture, just where like the Nazi Party kicked out the architects and they started making the buildings. That's where you transitioned. I thought that was great.
I like how you use examples from like around campus to like enforce your plaques and stuff.
Yeah, I think you guys like be able to relate it easier by seeing these buildings every day.
I like that you had a lot of information behind it rather than just, I don't know, showing a picture and describing it. We got a lot of information from you rather than looking at the slide. You know, then it's Mr. Kuchar style, you did that well.
Yeah, I want to emphasize that there have been a lot of presentations on the Bauhaus in the 3 sections that I'm looking at. And I really appreciate the fact that this one really got into a little more depth, because when you've seen 3 or 4 times basically the same photos and the same introductory material, it's nice to have it go to one field, I mean, whether it be architecture or another field, and really give us a little more detail. I think it's one of the first times that I focused on the fact that there are different architectural styles within that. And I like the fact that you show the prevailing and contrasting ones in 6 and 7 before Bauhaus aesthetics really take hold here. Of course, all of this also brought us things like the atrocious building we're sitting in. So, and it's just this building is, you know, the classic modernist block on the outside, and I think the interior is far worse than the outside of it, to be true. The interior design of it is appalling, and it does not, you know, that it's not functional, it doesn't make sense, it's not helpful in any number of ways. About the only thing they did right here is that some of the classrooms have windows, but actually the whole first floor is designed so that none of the classrooms have windows there even. So it's a really appalling thing that happens. It can go bad.
Yeah, they can not succeed in trying to do it. Sometimes it kind of just creates clutter and a lot of congestion within the building because there's so many rooms right next to each other and like no space for pedestrians within the building to interact with the building.
Other questions or comments on the presentation though?
So what is like the basic goal of like their architecture, like since you're saying it's cluttered and stuff, do they just want it simple and like less space, or,
like, it was just like reduce things to minimalism, like where just get rid of the unneeded things that created clutter, so therefore they turn functionalism and be able to utilize spaces the most.
I think the master's house is a kind of a stark realization of that. And the interesting thing about that is when you contrast that kind of minimalism with some of the things that you see in like a Japanese aesthetic, you get a very different idea of what minimalism is between the Germans and the Japanese, right?
I get like a phrase or quote, I don't really know how to pronounce it, I just learned in art history too, called Des Stijl, or S-T-I-J-L, and that means like distill to the essentials, was like a big motto that they went off of when they moved back actually to Chicago when they formed that school, was like the new reformation of teaching goals there. A lot of, I guess some of them were my pictures, and a few were actually scanned out of books. It looks like a good resource that I had for this topic. There's a lot of information I could find in books.
I like the fact that you let a lot of the photos to bleed off the sides, etc. Even when you had you get a big sense. With architecture, you've got to have a big scope on the slide, I think, and that worked well with it. Any other questions or comments? Okay, thank you very much, Jordan.